because he who controls Egypt and the Suez area would block English commerce and trade to India. In other words, you would have to go all the way down to the tip of Africa, come all around Cape Town, Africa, and go up through the Indian Ocean to India. Long, long way around. So for England, the new balance of power has shifted. And that, for the English, and if you were around 1763, 1770, at the time of the British involvement with the pesky little colonies in North America, the English got bigger problems than worrying about North America. They got the problem of what they begin to see as the strategic threat to their hold on India. Because later on, in the 19th century, the Russians now are moving eastward into Siberia and from there southward towards the Indian frontier. And they will both end up in a place I'm sure you've heard of back in the 1840s and 1850s up into the 1870s. Britain and Russia were fighting a war, not declaring war on each other, but fighting a war for the gains of a place called, I'm sure you may have heard of it, called Afghanistan. So they got their problems with Afghanistan, and 150 years later, by golly, we're in there. So the English could say, by God, that place, don't tell me you dumb Americans got yourself in there too. Well, there they are. But Afghanistan becomes a center. So, and the Russians are now becoming to England a strategic annoyance. And that is the basic problem, the Eastern question, is to keep Russia bottled up in the Black Sea, where Russian ships cannot go through the straits. And it is those narrow straits called the Dardanelles in the south, and up in the Black Sea entrance, the Bosphorus. So I would suggest you look at a map and understand what this is all about, because that's the key. And the British know, the English know this. If the Russians, and now with the Austrians, and we'll get to the Austrians in a minute, both want the destruction of the Ottoman Empire. The destruction of the Ottoman Empire from a strategic, economic, political, whatever you wish to call it, would be a very, very tough thing for the British to accept. For them, the Ottoman Empire sits there as a big block against Russian expansion into the Mediterranean. This is the great game of nations that international specialists will talk about in the 19th and earlier 20th century. The great game. The great game is to keep Russia out of India, way over here, and out of the Mediterranean, way over here. To do that is to keep the Ottoman Empire alive and to block all Russian expansion southward, or all threats to the Ottoman. Now, the problem is the English despise the Ottoman Empire. I mean, it's a corrupt place. It's an un-Christian. Well, why would it be Christian? They're all Mohammed. Where have I heard that before? Here you got it once more. And so for Britain, the whole purpose of the 19th century is the big problem is the Eastern question. And bear that in mind, because this is what Catherine did, and she opened the door. The next, as far as Austria is concerned, the Austrians have a problem with the new and growing pressure. We needn't go into that. And by 1861, as the American Civil War is about to break out, the Austrians find themselves tangled up with the new German Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck. And he was one tough cookie to deal with. And Bismarck has one thing, and that is the expansion of Germany as a great, great power. Two, to keep Austria out of German politics. Austria, you stay down there. We Germans, we Hohenzollerns, the royal family of the German, are going to take care of ourselves and to build a bigger and greater Germany. And so here you have these conflicts of the great powers, and the English, of course, having a problem with their eyes on the Ottoman Empire. During this Napoleonic era into the 1860s, most of the European powers were able to avoid wars by controlling all of the little countries that were fighting each other and sort of pushing them away and staying away from it, and keeping another world war breaking out. They had a pretty good brush in 1853 to 1856, the Crimean War, in which the Russians stumbled into a war of all things with Great Britain and France. And it's one of those wars that one wondered, how in the world could a war like that have been fought over what? Well, it all started out that the French had a emperor, Louis Napoleon, who, because his name was Napoleon, he thought he was, and he was the nephew of the great Napoleon Bonaparte, so therefore he should be like Bonaparte. He didn't quite have the sense, the knowledge, and the strength of being a Napoleon. So he stumbled into a war over the holy places in Jerusalem. And if I told you that story, you'd say, this is unbelievable, but it is believable. Believe me, it happened. And nothing came out of that war. Instead of a great poem, the Charge of the Light Brigade, at least we got that poem. And we got Florence Nightingale out of that. So something came out of it. The rest of that war was awful. But there is one thing that is very, very critical. The Austrians managed to have, as a foreign minister, a guy by the name of Bull, B-U-O-L. Now, Bull was the last guy, the worst guy, the least guy you would ever want to be a foreign minister at this critical moment of the Crimean War. Because a few years earlier, a revolution broke out in Austria, in which the Magyars, the Hungarian part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, wanted the liberation from Austria, wanted a free Hungary. And a bloody revolution broke out in 1848. The only thing that saved the Habsburg Empire was a Russian army that marched in all the way from Russia into Hungary and saved the Austrians from total defeat by the Hungarians. Total defeat. Now, you would have thought that the Austrians would have been so grateful for what the Russians did for them. They saved the empire. That's what they did. They saved the empire. And the Russians believed it. And the Tsar, Nicholas I, wasn't a two-party guy anyhow, but nevertheless, he went into Hungary, destroyed the Hungarian Revolution, saved Austria. Now, a few years later, Bull becomes foreign minister. The Russians now have Britain and France as enemies and have landed in Crimea at Sevastopol and are sort of on Russian territory. The Russian and their fleets are defeating the Russian fleet. And so for the Russians, it doesn't look good. They want Austria to help them, to help them against the Turks. So Turkey, France, and Britain are ganging up on Russia. The Russians are having a tough time. So the Russians asked the Austrians, help us on the Ottoman frontier and go to war against the Ottoman Empire. Help us in this war. Bull decides to be neutral. Now, if you were the Russians, then this is a gratitude and thanks you give. We saved your you-know-what in that war, and you don't want to help us now a few years that particular event of Bull, B-U-O-L, he is the guy to know about, lays the roots of a distant past that goes all the way down to 1914. It's sort of like a psychiatrist saying that a trauma, a horrible trauma that a child experiences life. And if he experiences this as a child, many years later, this is going to affect his behavior. Erik Erikson writes about that. He takes psychology, you know about that. Childhood trauma. In a way, the Russians have sort of acted as someone who had been severely injured and traumatized by an ungrateful ally, whom we did a lot to bail out, because every time the Russian armies were on the verge of a great victory over Napoleon, such as Suvorov and the Russian armies in Switzerland and northern Italy, the Austrian army pulls out. Or in Berlin, the Austrian army pulls out. And now Bull really sticks it to the Russians. And the Russians are not going to forget that. That was to them an insult and ungrateful. And there are a lot of books written of why would Bull do this. Bull thought somewhere in his mind, and this is the ideas of an idée fixe. In his mind, he believes that by helping the French and the British, they're going to love him. The point is that they could have no use for the Habsburg Empire themselves. So why would he think Britain and France really needed Austrian help? For what? Didn't need it. So the British ignored whatever Bull thought he could get. So Bull ends up not getting anything, and he gets the hatred that somewhere later on is going to be a payback time. For the Russians, they managed to survive the war. They also find themselves into a situation of where the Germans, under Bismarck, begin to evolve as a great European power. From 1863, when Bismarck takes over the chancellorship, from 1863 to 1891, 30 plus years, Bismarck will run Europe. So if ever there was one man that was the great Raja over Europe, it was Bismarck. And he does an incredible job. But Bismarck has one great concern from a strategic point of view. Germany now, which has defeated France in 1870-71 in the Franco-Prussian War. So Germany now has the greatest army in the world at this point. Maybe the American army of the Civil War was larger, but certainly the German army was a brilliant, great, good army. And so what Bismarck does, he does the smartest thing. He gets into war with Austria, defeats the Austrians, and he says, now that I beat them, we'll make friends with them, and we'll make Austria an ally and friend of Germany along our southern front. However, this is not going to work very well. In 1873, in 1876, Russia goes to war against the Turkish Empire again. Russians are fighting the Ottomans every other year and keep beating up on them, and the English come to help the Ottomans not to go under, basically, what they could do to help. And the British keep the Russians at bay through diplomacy, military threat. Now, having this in mind, what are the Russians going to do? And what are the Austrians going to do? Well, Bismarck has a very great idea. To keep the Austrians away out of Germany, he's going to tell the Austrians, go down there in the Balkans and make friends down there and create in Serbia and Bulgaria and Romania, all the places down there, carve yourself out areas of interest. For Russia, The Russians can stand with that because they are friends with Germany. They made the Triple Alliance, the alliance of the three emperors, the Dreikaiserbund. So Germany, Russia, and Austria, sort of an alliance that Bismarck puts together. Now, in that alliance of the three, the Russians hate the Austrians now, the Austrians hate the Russians. And Bismarck is trying to pull these two together and say, look, let's be friends, and blah, 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 blah. However, this is not going to work very well. In 1873, in 1876, Russia goes to war against the Turkish Empire again. Russians are fighting the Ottomans every other year and keep beating up on them, and the English come to help the Ottomans not to go under, basically, what they could do to help. And the British keep the Russians at bay through diplomacy, military threat. Now, having this in mind, what are the Russians going to do? And what are the Austrians going to do? Well, Bismarck has a very great idea. To keep the Austrians away out of Germany, he's going to tell the Austrians, go down there in the Balkans and make friends down there and create in Serbia and Bulgaria and Romania, all the places down there. Carve yourself out areas of interest. For Russia, the same thing happened. The Russians have been pushed out of Europe pretty much by Bismarck, and by the British on the Mediterranean. So the Russians have the same idea. They're going to be the protectors, quote unquote, the protectors of the Slavs, the Christian Orthodox Slavs. So basically, it's Russia, the Orthodox Slavic people, against the Muslim Turks. And a few Protestants are up there, but they don't count. And so it's a real mix-up of who is who with whom and so on. But what has happened is that Bismarck, as brilliant as he is also putting the Austrians in the area where the Russians would least want the Austrians to be now, that they're not friends. The Austrians now, in the Congress of Berlin of 1878, in which the Russians defeat the Ottoman Turks in a great war there. And in that war, the Russian armies are at the gates of Constantinople. They are at the point of knocking the Ottoman Empire apart. And they are going to take Constantinople and the Straits and get into the Mediterranean. So they think. Bismarck doesn't want to see that to happen either, and the British, with their Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, do not want to see the Ottoman Empire disappear, because that opens the gateway to India. By now, Disraeli in 1878 has done one of the most interesting legerdemain. Right as things were boiling in the Russian-Austrian situation, Disraeli decides now is the time for the English to act. And they're going to do it against the French, who are now practically been beaten by the French, by the Germans in the war of 1870-71. And so the Khedive of Egypt is gone bankrupt. He needs money. And so the French have decided that they would go to the House of Rothschild, a big Jewish banking house in France, and get money from the banking house of Rothschild and buy the Suez Canal, buy the stock of the Suez Canal, and they would own it and block the British, and then join in an alliance maybe with the Ottoman Empire against the English. Bismarck, I keep saying that, Disraeli has got that figured out. So he has this great idea. The French bourse, which is the Wall Street of stock also, would open up Monday. This is Friday. He goes to Rothschild and he borrows so many billions of marks, French, British pounds. And he sends an envoy over to the Khedive of Egypt and said, we are going to give you more money than you would get from the French. Here, take it. And the Khedive said, boy, wow, oh, good. So he takes it, and the next morning, Monday morning, the English wake up to find that they own the canal and that they screwed the French on the weekend. And the French are outraged by this all. And so Parliament is ready to impeach Disraeli. And they asked, why did you do it? He said, for Her Majesty's sake. That was his name. And Her Majesty being Victoria, she just loves her, she calls him Dizzy. So what the English have done, they stuck it to the French, and they stuck it, of course, to the Russians. That the Russians can't get through the canal, the French can't, they control the canal, they control the gateway to India. That was a bit of the international politics of the 1870s and 80s. They have the Congress of Berlin, which is going to talk about now about the Russian victory over the Ottoman Empire. And they stripped the Russians of everything the Russians wanted to get as a victory. Said, no, you can't have it. Better yet, the Congress of Berlin, of which Bismarck is now the boss of, so he's running the show, he's like a puppeteer. And he said to the English, he said, I think we got the Russians where we want them. We beat the hell out of the French. We don't have to worry about the Ottomans. You're going to take care of it. The Russians can't do it. So everybody is very happy, except the Russians. They really realize now they got gypped and cheated of the great glorious victory. But the worst thing of all, they being the Congress of Berlin, gave Austria the suzerainty, or to look over a place called Bosnia-Herzegovina. Bosnia-Herzegovina. That big block, blacks of territory on that map, Bosnia-Herzegovina. And the Austrians are told that this territory belongs to Turkey, but you, the Austrians, are responsible for the safety of the Christians. But the Christians are mainly Russian Orthodox and should be under Russian protection, so the Russians think. So they gave the Orthodox Christians to be protected by the Catholic Christians. Or you talk about a mishmash and all that, there you have it. This is going to be very, very painful for the Russians. They know now, no matter what they do, they're going to get it right where it hurts them the most. And so they wait and they wait and they wait. And things happen, we're not going to go over all the details or whatever. But somewhere around 1903, a little country called Serbia, which had one of the largest population of pigs in Europe, and the big moneymaker is selling pigs to the Austrians and Germans for pork sausage. So the great pork war goes on between Austria and Serbia. Now the problem is that the king of Serbia was pro-Austrian. Well, a coup d'etat takes place and he and his family are murdered in 1903, and a pro-Russian group comes and runs Serbia. And the Karađorđević family. And so the whole mix has changed. And on their doorsteps now, the Austrians have a real pain in the butt. And that pain in the butt is Serbia. And their prime minister is supposedly favoring a war of terror against the Austrians. In 1908, the Russian foreign minister, a guy by the name of Izvolsky, Izvolsky, don't forget him, Izvolsky, the Russian foreign minister, who hasn't done too well in all of this stuff we're talking about, and the Austrian foreign minister, a guy by the name of Aehrenthal, Aehrenthal, Aehrenthal. What Izvolsky figured out, there's only one way for me to be a hero of Russia and to get all of the great glories of Russia, and that is to get to Constantinople and to open up the straits where Russian warships can get through the straits and go into the Mediterranean. So he talks to his, calls up Aehrenthal, or whatever they do there, or tweets him, I guess. But anyhow, said, look, let's get together at this little town called Buchwald, B-U-C-H-A-L-D, Buchwald, and we'll make a deal. I, the Russian foreign minister, promise Austria that if you will agree with me and what I want, you will get more or less half of the Balkans as your sphere of interest, and you can build a railroad all the way from Vienna to Constantinople and blah, 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 and all that. And all we want is our pathway to Constantinople. And that if you do that, we agree that this would be great for both of us. So what Izvolsky thinks that Aehrenthal is going to buy into that, which would be a good deal for the both of them. Actually, could have avoided World War I easily. Well, Aehrenthal was a little bit greedy. But, so Aehrenthal says, look, that sounds pretty good to me, Izvolsky, but you better talk to the French and the Russians and see what they say. Well, they go to Paris, and the French, being the French, say basically, well, we don't know, you better talk to the British, the English. I mean, we don't care if you take Constantinople. You Russians, you want it, you can have, but you better talk to the British. While he's there, Izvolsky is in Paris, the newspapers have on their headline, Aehrenthal and Austrians annex Bosnia-Herzegovina. That wasn't part of the deal, because what has Izvolsky got? He ain't got nothing. And Aehrenthal trumped him. I didn't want to use that word, trump, but I did. Got to stay away from that word. Anyhow, he got him, right? And he was chipped, to put it back. He gets to London, the English tell the Russians, there's no way you're going to get Constantinople. So that's the end of the career of Izvolsky. They get a new foreign minister, Sazama. So poor Izvolsky got gypped. The Austrians got Bosnia-Herzegovina, and the Russians got nothing but humiliation. And in all of that, terrorism begins to break out. The Serbians now find the Russians behind them. Right? We have been insulted, humiliated, screwed, and gypped, and everything else by the Austrians, and now, so we are going to back you Serbians. And it's that Russian backing of the Serbians that the Germans, the French, the British, the Russians, everybody, and later on the Americans, get involved in a war way over there, and what the heck is all this about? And when, on that glorious day, that these terrorists, they're called the Black Hand, assassinated on June the 28th, 1914, the Archduke, all hell broke loose. And Germany mobilizes its army, Austria mobilizes its army. A Franco-Russian alliance is made up, and we haven't gone into that, but that's part of it. And everybody is going to arms. what was happening into America on June the 28th? You find where's the United States in all this? The big headlines. Anybody knows what the headlines were on June the 28th, 1914? Star pitcher joins Boston Red Sox, named Babe Ruth. There's the beginning of a great career of Babe Ruth, June the 28th. The only other thing I could say about June the 28th that bears your knowledge, and I don't think you're going to have it in your exam, it's my birthday. So that's a brief story told as quickly as possible. As someone said, only you could tell a story like that. But you see what has happened in this story. How did I do, Harry?
Very well.
Hey, that's coming from my guy there. But,
How to shoot the Archduke now.
but what you see happening here, was it Bobby Burns who said, the best laid plans of mice and men certainly can get screwed up. I'm paraphrasing it. But it is incredible. How in the world could anything like this have happened? And yet it happened. The world going, not only that, but you as young folks here between 18 and 20, in a generation that probably doesn't realize you are still the heirs of that great war of 1914, 1918. The Middle East would not be today if it had not been for the Treaty of Paris of 1919. Boy, did they screw that one up. We cannot imagine how our life has changed.